Today, I'm joined by my longtime friend, Travis Paul Martin. We met over 20 years ago as students at Parsons Paris, back when we were young, stylish, and slightly delusional about how the fashion industry actually worked. Fun fact, I even made clothes for Travis back in the day, and later I may or may not have frequently crashed at his New York apartment while job hunting and launching my first company. Since then, Travis has built an incredible career in marketing and communications, working with some of the biggest names in fashion, lifestyle, and consumer goods. Think Gucci, Barney's, Rothy's. He's honed his skills at the top agencies like KCD and BPCM before launching his own firm, TPM Consulting, in 2003. Now he's helping brands craft stories that not only look good, but actually drive real impact. We're diving into his journey from Parsons to PR powerhouse, what it's really like to work in a constantly evolving industry, and how he's designing a life that he truly loves. Travis, welcome to the show. Hey there, design enthusiast. Welcome to Inside the Design Studio, the podcast where we unravel threads of life and design. I'm your host, David Peck, your guide through the cosmic wonders, the tangible touches, and the delightful twists of creating a life you absolutely love. Today's episode is a special peek into my eclectic toolbox, the secret weapons I use to design a life that's as vibrant as my creations. So grab your metaphorical sketchpad and let's dive into the art of intentional living. Okay, Travis, so back in the very beginning, before we met in Paris, what is it that you actually thought you wanted to do in life? What brought you to even Parsons, New York to begin with, and then eventually to Paris?
Oh, I thought I was going to be an actor. I grew up a theater kid. Like, it's what I loved. It was like my sport growing up. Like, my brother had, soccer on Saturdays and I had theater on Saturdays. Like, it's just kind of what my childhood was. And when it got to the point in high school of, starting to look at colleges, I really thought I was going to go into theater. And so I, kind of did the rounds of, my mother was very nice to take me all over the country and to audition for the programs. Because of course, I only wanted to go to the best. I wanted to go to Tisch and I wanted to Syracuse or, all of these schools that have incredible drama programs.
Did you want to do musical theater or just straight theater?
I loved it all. I mean, I'm a big musical theater fan, but I loved it all. And honestly, I started getting the responses back from schools and I'd get into a school, but not get into the drama program. And it was always just you can always try your second year or whatnot. Or I did not get into NYU or Tisch. And so I was just okay, what am I? It just kind of made me really look at what I was going to do the next 4 years. I, grew up in a family where, the question of college was not a question. You went to college. So I was okay, I know I'm going to spend the next 4 years studying something. And if I wasn't going to the best of the best, did I want to spend 4 years studying drama at a mediocre school? And that sounds so, I don't know, I don't know how that is coming off, but I just was I kind of was I like school. I like learning. So I was if I'm not going to go to the best, then maybe I'm just going to change things up and try something different.
Yeah.
And I had my senior year of high school, I had technically graduated a semester early, but not officially because I was in all of our different drama programs. If you graduated a semester early, you wouldn't be able to do anything in the school. So I wouldn't be able to, do any of our spring shows or anything like that. So I started taking classes at the community college in Salt Lake, just as elective credits to add so that I was still doing something, could still participate in the programs. And there were a couple fashion classes. And so I started taking those, and I always really enjoyed fashion. It's something I cared about for a long time, but was not really, had never really thought of it as a career or anything like that. And
curious because you grew up in Salt Lake and I grew up in Santa Fe. So I don't think either one is known for fashion. It wasn't in my zeitgeist at all.
Yeah. I mean, Salt Lake definitely is not. I was born in DC. And I do have very when I lived in DC, my mom worked for Amtrak, like in the corporate office in public affairs, and she was always like really well put together. And I do remember that vividly as a kid of just like how nice I thought my mom looked. I remember going on, like weekend errand trips to like Saks. I think that's where she bought like her hosiery and, that kind of stuff, like back in the day when women like would go to a department store for that kind of stuff. So I remember being aware of it from an early age. And you'll see like even some like my elementary school, like, school pictures, I'm wearing like a white button up, and one I'm wearing like third grade. I think I was wearing like a olive green blazer. Like I was just, like I always kind of cared. But yeah, Salt Lake did not like have anything like that. I mean, it's funny, like the Utahns are very attractive. They are, I think, like quite vain and like they love to look good, but I just think they're probably like 3 years behind. Like they're not like the most current. So it's like
now they have the Real Housewives, so
well, which are a perfect example of behind the times. I love them, but again, like they are not like New York. They're not.
Yeah, it's different. Yeah.
And so anyway, so while I was in these classes, like trying to figure out, what I was going to go to college for, I had been accepted to the University of Utah, and that was kind of like, well, I guess this is what's going to happen. And to be honest, I didn't know what I was going to study. The subject of like fashion schools came up in one of these classes, and there's a school in Los Angeles called FIDM, the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising.
Made a little bit famous by Lauren Conrad.
Totally. I'll get to, I mean, she started the year after me. The year after I graduated. So spoiler alert, I learned that they were on like a trimester system. And so their like application process was very different than kind of like standard universities. So like I still had time to apply. And so I whipped together like I still have it. And every once in a while, as like I move it, my like portfolio unearths itself. And I'm like, oh my God, like how did anyone let me in? Like the croquis I used to do and everything. But so I applied and I got in, and I was like, great. Like there was a part of me that always wanted to live in Los Angeles. So I was like, this could be fun.
Yeah.
It was definitely a bit of a conversation with my parents because at the time, FIDM was still only a junior college. Like you could only get up to an associate's degree, which I'm pretty sure is different now. I'm pretty sure some of their programs like are full graduate or full undergraduate, and they even have graduate programs now. So I did that. I went there and did the associate's program in fashion design, and I loved it. But I would say kind of into the second year, I was very aware of like my skills versus some of like my classmates, and just like in everything from construction to sketching, like there were some kids who just like got it, and I was just like, and it wasn't really like my strength. But then like I remember maybe it was like a sketching class where, or I don't know what class it would have been, but we had to design I think we had to design like a runway collection, but then design like a commercial collection. And that was kind of like this first like concept of like runway versus commercial. And I remember understanding, I think, that concept a little bit better, and like being able to work with like my friends who were really good designers and help them think of like their runway in like a commercial point of view. So like that was kind of my first aha of like, okay, maybe I don't have to leave fashion, but maybe I don't have to like stay in design. And so I graduated. I knew I needed to go somewhere else to finish my degree to appease my parents. And so and Parsons was kind of always, like the goal. And to get into Parsons, I had to go and do a summer intensive program, and a fine art summer intensive program. So I moved to New York and I did that program and it was terrible. I mean, it was so, I found it so hard. Like, well, like the painting and that kind of stuff. I
Yeah.
just thought like, and it's so like,
People don't understand how much that first year, that foundation year, which is essentially what you were doing in the summer.
Exactly.
You can't choose to go into fashion directly. If you want to go to fashion, you have to go through this really intense foundation year, which means that you have to basically be a fine artist. And then once you finish that, then you can go draw fashion drawings. There's no quick shortcut way at Parsons anyway to get to the fashion program.
Yeah, exactly. And I find I do see the value in that program, but I just like, oh my God, it was so painful. I was like, they're never gonna let me in. I just, I find art so like subjective. Like even the other day I was walking through the Art Institute here in Chicago and you see things hanging and you're like, I know I've done something better than that. That like so was like, oh no, you're terrible. So it's like the whole thing, I was just like, this is such a racket. But I did it. I passed, but I wasn't quite ready to like, again, like I kind of knew deep inside that I didn't want to be a designer anymore.
Yeah.
And again, kind of like going back to like theater, I was like, God, do I really like try and get into the design program at Parsons to finish my degree, just knowing that it's not really what I want to do. So thankfully, my parents let me kind of take a year off. And to just kind of like figure it out. My mom's like, if you want to stay in New York, you have to find a job like and all of that. So I got a job at Saks and I was really lucky because they had at the time, this was like the Fifth Avenue flagship. And at the time they had these positions that were, I mean, I think they had many different titles, designated sales associate is one, or like brand manager, some, but like basically like you were a Saks employee, but a lot of designers and on the different floors, like kind of had, it was like their own little like boutiques.
Yeah.
And so you would be a Saks employee, but you would be in one spot and then you would get kind of like a monthly stipend from the brand where like whose shop you were supposed to, kind of run. And so I became the like designated selling associate or brand manager, whatever we called it for Burberry. And it was the time Christopher Bailey was still doing Pour Some, but I wasn't, the shop I had was like kind of more of just like the streetwear, like the everyday, the
Right.
London collection, as I think it was called back then. And so basically my whole role was obviously like to sell clothes, but you really like this, like the monthly stipend that the brand gave you was so that you could really like pay attention to the business and be this kind of like point person between both like the Burberry buying team and the Saks buying team of like what's selling, what's not selling, what are people asking for. And I really loved that process. Like I thought it was so interesting that this kind of was happening and I was learning a lot of different parts of the business. And so for a minute I was like, oh, maybe I want to be a buyer. And then I learned how much like math is involved.
It's all spreadsheets.
Yeah, I was like, that's for sure not happening. But I was really enjoying it. But so then I think, I don't know when you have to submit college applications, but eventually I was like, okay, I need to go back to school and finish this. And again, I still didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. I mean, so I knew it was kind of more on the business side of things and not design. And so every school kind of had their own program. Parsons had design and management. I applied to RISD, I think. I applied to Art Institute of Chicago. I can't remember. There might have been a couple others that had, fashion programs, but not just design. And when I was filling out the Parsons application, a big part of this next chapter for me was I really wanted to study abroad. And so I was looking at Parsons and they had Parsons Paris and I was like, great. But then as I was reading about it, I discovered it was like, oh wait, I could actually just go to Parsons Paris and not have this be just a study abroad thing. And it was, totally separate application, a totally separate application fee. And I don't even think I told my parents. I think I just again, I was like young enough still that like, my parents were, paying the application fees for, these things because they were expensive.
Yeah.
And so I think I paid this one like out of my own pocket and whatnot. And my acceptance to Parsons Paris was the first acceptance I got. And so I just kind of took it as a sign of like, this is what's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so, because of my degree from FIDM and my summer program at Parsons New York, I was able to transfer to Parsons Paris as a junior to basically do the last 2 years of the design and management program.
Yeah.
And so that's what got me to Paris.
It's so funny because we have such, in many ways, similar stories, because I have a previous degree in classical music and didn't know what I wanted to do. And because I knew it wasn't music, like been there, done that. I also thought that I wanted to be an actor at one point. And I was like, no, that's just going to be like being a musician. And I don't want to live that life. And so I had actually desperately wanted to live in Boston and had applied to all the schools, but the only school I really wanted to go to was Boston University. And this was pre-internet days, and they ended up sending me the wrong application. And by the time I got the right application, it was too late for that year, and I would have to wait a whole nother year. But I had been accepted at all these other schools. I was like, this isn't the right thing. And then, so I finished my music degree and then was working at Ralph Lauren and ended up having friends being like, why aren't you doing something with design? I'm like, I don't know. And so I was like,
Ralph Lauren, like in the store.
I was in the store. So I started in sales and then I ended up, they liked how I folded sweaters. So they asked if I wanted to be in visual merchandising. So I ended up helping, like being the visual merchandising manager at that local, like tiny store in Ohio. And, did the windows and all of the displays and everything. And then applied to, I wanted to go to Parsons or FIT and I wanted to study abroad. I knew that because my music degree didn't allow me to study abroad, and Parsons was in Paris. And I was like, oh, well, that's where I want to go. And so I applied to FIT FIDM or FIT Parsons and Pratt. And the first acceptance I got was Parsons Paris. And I was like, well, that's where I'm going. And my family was like, no, you're not. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm doing. So yeah, and it's funny. So in a year off in between because I had never taken studio art classes ever and put together a portfolio and luckily was able to use those credits and all my other credits to transfer in as a sophomore. So I was able to start the fashion program directly in Paris. And I thought I was only going to be there a year and then transfer to New York to finish the degree because at the time they hadn't had the degree program where you could finish in Paris. And then that year, while I was there in the middle of the year, they said, we're changing it. So if you want to stay and you want to graduate in Paris, you can. And I was like, sign me up. That's what I want to do. Cool. So you finished in Paris. And then what brought you back to New York? Why didn't you stay in Europe?
Oh, I kind of tried, but then also, I mean, I have to say, like, I don't really believe in regrets, but I feel like the one thing I usually always say is that I feel like I rushed through Parsons. Like I was that kid that like, as much as I enjoyed school, I was so ready to be an adult and like have a job and like out in the world. I was like, I just want to be done. And I really thought like New York was like the place for me, like where I was supposed to be. So like part of me was very anxious to like get back to New York and, start a career. I did apply for a couple programs. The nice thing about going to Parsons Paris is, as an American, after you graduate, you get, an extended visa for a year. Yeah. So I kind of looked at different things, but again, because I transferred in and only spent 2 years, I didn't really get like the full 4-year like language experience. So like time I transferred in, they make every, first year student take a French class, but then that's all like I had room for basically in my credits.
Yeah, it's hard.
And I tried one semester to like take French simultaneously at the Catholic Institute, I think, somewhere where we could take credits.
Yeah.
And it was just so hard. Like I just like, because I was taking the max classes I could take every semester at Parsons so that I could just like get out of there.
Yeah.
Again, I loved Paris. I loved being there, but I just put this rush on myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I didn't speak fluent French by the time I graduated, and so it was hard to find a job. France is very particular.
Yes.
Even like, and yeah, I don't know. Like I couldn't. I guess to be honest, I don't know if I looked at London. I maybe did at trying to find something there, but again, it was just like it was kind of not happening. So it's like I'm just gonna go back to New York. And went back to New York, and it was I graduated in 2000. Did we graduate at the same time?
That's what I was trying. I graduated in 2006.
You're a year before me. Okay, I graduated in '07. Went back to New York, and it was the beginning of the '08 crash. And
Yeah, it was a wonderful time to try to find a job especially in like luxury goods fashion. It was amazing.
yeah, yeah. No, it was
No,
terrible.
it was the worst.
Yeah, but so I went back, and thankfully, like at my time at Saks before I went to Paris, gosh, to be honest, I don't remember what his title was, and I think he's still at the company, and he kind of an even bigger role. But this man named John Cruz was kind of became a wonderful friend and mentor, and he gave me a sales job back when I got back to New York, while simultaneously like putting me up for like job interviews like at Saks Corporate, and because he knew where I wanted to be and wanted to do. And
Yeah.
so I did that. But again, it was kind of like the beginning of like the fall. Like no
Yeah.
one was hiring, entry level positions in kind of new categories you didn't have experience in. And commission luxury sales was like, I mean, it was so different than, 2 years prior when I was there. I mean, commission sales is tough in general. And like the people who really do well, like I truly believe it's a
It's a
specific
gift.
talent.
Yeah.
But it was even harder the second time around. And so then I kind of then went on, I had like 3 years post graduation before like I finally landed like the job. I think
Yeah.
it's like,
Well, I remember when I would crash at your apartment in New York and we'd go visit you at Saks, like, let's go see Travis for lunch. And it's like you were just in that waiting game of what is next. Is this isn't it, but like what are you going to do? Because nothing is available. Like
yeah,
literally nothing was available.
yeah,
It was a really tough time. I mean, that's why I ended up starting a company really was because I was interviewing for these jobs all over the country, like in New York and LA, and like either I was overqualified or underqualified, or it would have been like a really technical position stuck behind a computer doing CAD work, which I had no interest in doing. I was like, that's not why I went to design school. And it was hard. It was really frustrating because your options were so limited at that time because of the economy.
yeah, yeah. So it was brutal.
But you did it. So what was your first break into getting into sort of the PR, marketing, communications space, like from Saks?
So, okay. So really quick timeline, graduated, moved back to New York. I was in New York for a year. I then came to Chicago for a year because New York was just really tough.
Yeah.
Chicago I did for a year. And then
And how did you, were you moving? I can't remember. Did you move with Saks? Did you go to the Chicago Saks or how did
I
you?
did go to the Chicago Saks, but it was all by my own like accord. Like they weren't asking me to move or anything like that. Like New York was just again getting very hard. Like I wasn't finding a job. As everyone knows, it's super expensive. And one of my one of my best friends from New York is born and raised in Chicago. She was like, why don't you try Chicago? Like, cause my whole thing was like, I don't want to move home to my mom's. Like, I
Right.
just, like, that was like kind of admitting defeat.
Right.
And also my, my mom was, I say my mom, my dad was still around, but my dad traveled a lot. So I always just kind of refer to it as my mom, but like they kind of put it out there as like, it was never really an option to go home. Like,
Right.
you teen, you go to college and like there's no turning back. Like you just go.
Yeah.
But finally, like after she saw how hard like New York was and Chicago, she was like, if you want to come home, come home. And so I went home to Utah for a year. It was like I started a terrible blog where I would literally just like go to like all of the different boutiques in Salt Lake and like look and see what they had. It was supposed to be this like Utah fashion blog. It was terrible. And kind of, I don't know, I'm sure I had a part-time job. I can't even remember what it would have been right now. But I just kind of hung out and I didn't really know where I was going, what was going to happen or where I was going to be. And this is kind of the first moment in my life where that whole phrase, like, everything that's meant for you will come, and everything happens for a reason, etc.
Yeah.
Again, I didn't know what I was going to do. Somehow came into my mind this like crazy idea of getting like a summer job in like Provincetown.
Uh,
And so like I was, this is back in the day of like Craigslist. And I like found this like kind of like, I don't even know if luxury is the right word, but like upscale, like bed and breakfast that like literally needed like a towel boy for the summer. But like with those jobs, you get like housing. And so I was like, why not? Like, what the hell? Like like, what am I doing here? Like, let's just, do
you had
it.
nothing to lose.
Nothing to lose. Cut to literally like a week before I was supposed to leave, like they rescinded like the offer and they were like, we don't need you anymore. And I was like, oh, motherfucker. And so I still had like all of these like plane tickets to go to the East Coast and all this stuff. So I ended up just, going and using that ticket to go to New York to like visit some friends and to just kind of like go back in that space and see what's going on.
Yeah.
And I was literally just walking down the street and I ran into a girl that I knew from Paris. She was at the American University of Paris, where I took Parsons Paris at the time had an agreement with the
AUP,
American University. And I stayed like the summer in between my junior and senior years. I stayed there and took classes, and they were all at AUP because I don't think Parsons offered summer classes.
Yeah, there were certain liberal arts classes that you couldn't take, or if you wanted to take them, you had to take them through AUP.
Yeah, so a girl I met at AUP, we literally just bumped into each other on the street in New York and like started catching up. And it was so funny because like I was like, oh my God, this girl has been living my life. We graduated, I can't remember. She must have graduated the same year I did, or maybe a year after. But she like met a French man, and so she was staying in Paris. She got a job at KCD Paris, which KCD is the agency I eventually end up at, a big fashion PR agency, and one of the places I like applied before I left Paris and never heard anything. And she had broken up with this guy that she had been dating, and she was moving to New York and transferring to like the KCD New York office.
Yeah.
I was like, it's like my dream. It's all I've like ever wanted. And she was like, well, like, let me get settled. And she's like, I'll figure out who to get your resume to and like see if something can happen. And sure enough, like a week after she started, she's like, send me your resume. I know exactly who to send it to. And so she sent someone my resume and I got a call and they were like, do you want an internship? Like,
no, but yes.
I graduated college, I was like, well, I kind of need to like live. So like, I don't know how that's going to work out, but I, talked to my mom and I was like, I kind of feel like I have to take this. So I started putting trying to figure out the puzzle pieces. A friend of mine lived in Washington Heights, like in a big 1-bedroom apartment, and he agreed to let me like rent his like pull-out sofa. And so I said yes. And so I went to New York and I really like treated that internship as like this is what was going to get me a job. And thankfully I could, I was again, like, I think all of the other interns were like still in school, like actually doing it for school credit.
Right.
Again, like timing is everything. Like looking back, like I think I was part of, there was a whole wave in New York of like lawsuits around internships within the fashion industry. I think it kind of stemmed from like the publishing side, but
right.
But it was kind of like feel like I was part of one of the last years of like real internships in New York. But I, again, timing was on my side. I started this internship in August. It was right before Fashion Week. A girl in the office got let go like 2 or 3 weeks into my internship, and they needed additional help for the Diane von Furstenberg show. And so they were like, can you be a freelancer for this show? But when it's done, which is a paid position, but they're like, but when it's done, you have to go back to being an intern. And I was like, yes, I will do whatever. And so I did that. So I was like a freelancer for maybe 3 weeks. And then one of the publicists, the main publicist I kind of was helping out on, I mean, it's who I was interning for. But then she oversaw the show that I was freelancing for. She would go to Europe and do the European shows after New York. And so they kept me on as a freelancer for a little bit to kind of like help cover for her while she was traveling. But sure enough, she came back and I went back to being an intern. But then so maybe 6 weeks in total, it was maybe we're talking like October, November. So again, I went there in August. By October and November, they offered me a full-time contract position. Then I think maybe another 6 months later, March was when they hired me as a full-time publicist. That's how I got my break.
It's so interesting because I think I knew nothing about the fashion industry or fashion in general when I decided to go study design. I literally thought fashion was the Oscars. I had no idea what it was. Because I didn't grow up shopping, luxury brands. I didn't understand PR, marketing. I mean, none of it. I had absolutely no clue. But I think your whole story is a really powerful testament of it's so important to be where you want to be. You have to be in proximity. And a lot of times there's a lot of sacrifices that are involved of little, no money, years and years, literally, of kind of treading water before something clicks. And I think I've noticed so much with our own interns or people who, have worked, they kind of expect it to all happen magically, really quickly. And maybe that's the social media, Instagram, TikTok of it all. But for many people who have long, successful careers, it took a long time to get there. Their success was never overnight. And it's the long term, making those connections, maintaining those connections, bumping into people at the right time, being available, being willing to take a leap and be like, I don't know how I'm going to pay for this move to New York and do this internship, but I know that I have to be in the room that when they're looking for that person, I'm there.
Yeah.
And that opportunity. And it takes a lot of grit, I feel, especially in this industry. Yeah. And even though there's a lot of money in the industry, you don't always get paid in a way that is commensurate with what these brands are doing, and a lot of it's smoke and mirrors. I mean, it's theater, bringing it all back to your roots. It's a lot of making magic happen with very little resources.
Totally. It was super rough, but I think there was something that clicked early on too that was this is I loved those early days at KCD, you worked, and I'm not talking just show season, but you could work 16, 18-hour days. It was long, it was hard, but you hear a lot of nightmares within the industry. I have to say, KCD was always they were so good to the interns. They were so good to everyone. I was never I don't really have any crazy Devil Wears Prada stories, and I never had to fetch coffee or dry cleaning for a boss or anything like that. So I'm very fortunate in that way. And so I was really happy to bust my ass. I loved what I was doing.
Yeah.
And that was that really helped kind of push through it, because it wasn't that kid that, there's also a lot of privilege in the fashion industry, especially in New York, where, kids come from a lot of money and their parents are paying for their apartment and whatnot. And that was not me. And so, it was, yes, I was only paying $500 a month in rent for that one period, but I was on the sofa, like in a living room with,
Yeah.
no walls and no privacy, and like all the way up, like in Washington Heights, like it was a trek. But it's, again, like I was so happy to be working and to have a job in an industry that I really wanted to be in. It was all worth it.
Yeah. So did you, I mean, because I think you spent a lot of years uncertain about what it is that you wanted to do. Did you recognize as soon as you got to KCD that it was like, this is it?
Yeah. And I did, because I think a naturally curious person. And I love to be kind of a problem solver. So I like to have my hands in a lot of different things, even if I'm not like part of the end result. And so so it's kind of hard to, and I thought this was a very interesting piece of advice someone gave me once. And it kind of really stuck with me as was to try and develop a bit of focus in what I was looking for, because I was that eager kid that would go to places and really was like, I'll do anything.
Yeah.
Give me a job in any department, I'll do it.
Yeah.
And on one hand, people really, I think, appreciate, that eagerness and that drive. But
Right.
it also, when you're going to these big companies and people are trying to hire, they need a bit of direction. They need to be able to really be able to see you in a specific role. So when you
Yeah.
go in very vague, it's hard for them to understand where you are going to fit. And so again, PR wasn't the first thing that necessarily stuck out at me, because I didn't really understand, I think, how all encompassing that was, of terms of
Right.
what it really meant. But it meant, doing, fashion shows and doing events and doing just kind of the normal day to day, press stuff of getting clients in magazines and whatnot. So I didn't, once I think I understood kind of how all encompassing it was, I was like, oh yeah, this is what I should be doing. Cause it lets me, again, do kind of a bunch of different things kind of under one umbrella.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much. And I feel like PR has evolved even more with social media and all of the direct to consumer brands. It's very different than what we were taught in school. All of those paths are sort of, not that they're obsolete, but they're just a very small portion of how businesses function and run and are founded now, and how you get the word out, how you market. So yeah, it is one of those jobs. I think I had a similar problem too, whereas I actually enjoyed a lot of different things. And that's part of the reason why I knew I didn't want a cubicle job, is I was I wouldn't be satisfied with that. But then people don't know what to do always with a broad set of skills or an eagerness to work in lots of different areas. I think it can be an asset, but it can also be, when people are, especially when you're first starting out, people want to know something, they want to identify you. They, even if you're working in an industry that prides itself in thinking outside the box, but they still want the box. And I liked what you said too about privilege. I think so much, especially, I mean, really in design too, but I think in the PR part, the way people have gotten started traditionally is because that they had the financial freedom to spend years not getting paid or getting paid very, very little, and being able to dress the part and wearing all the brands and knowing the right people and being able to go to the right restaurants. And when you don't have those resources, you're really cut off at the knees, not being able to, you don't have the same leg up that other people have. So it takes a lot of gumption to do that. So you worked at KCD for a while, and then you eventually ended up back in Chicago. So what brought you back to Chicago?
I worked at KCD, and then I went to two other agencies, Prep Group and BPCM. And I loved all of those experiences for very different reasons. But I started BPCM 11 days after my father passed away. It just kind of became a year of again, it is a hard job. Being in New York in that industry is very tough. And losing a parent, I think you just start to question everything. I'm like, what am I
Yeah.
doing with my life? Like every little thing that like doesn't make you happy, you're like, is it worth it? Is this really what I'm, doing? So I kind of like just like as I was starting this job and dealing with losing my father, I was just so many questions, and I realized I was like, I just again, I was like, I don't know what is next or what I want. And one day I came home and my roommate was like, hey, I think I want to get a place on my own. And it was kind of, again, like, I think, going back to, I think everything happens for a reason. It was
Right.
the moment that I felt like I had the, opportunity to kind of like escape, because I think, anyone who's lived in New York, I think especially at a young age, knows one of the hardest things about it is, finding a place to live, or
Yeah.
finding roommates. If you ever have to like, if you're in a situation where one person leaves, to try and find a replacement that you
Yeah.
like is kind of like unbearable. I think, I had been that whole year, that I had started this job and was dealing with losing my dad. I had thought a lot of like, maybe I'm just going to like leave and I don't know what, go somewhere else. But it was like, oh God, then I'd have to like, tell my roommate and put him out and all that kind of stuff. But so him saying that was like, okay, like I can do this. And so I was like, great. So I kind of made up this whole scenario in my head of like, this was in July, I think. Um, and we were already getting close to like planning September Fashion Week. So I was like, why don't I just, tell my job, like give them tons of notice and be like, I want to stay through like September shows. And then, so that would end up, being like September 15th, let's say. And then I told my roommate, I was like, let's ask our landlord if we can have our end date be, like the end of like September 30th or 31st, whatever, and that
Yeah.
month passed. And he agreed. And our landlord agreed. And so it kind of put everything in motion. I was lucky that I had moved so much previous that I didn't really have a lot of belongings. Like this apartment that I was living in, my roommate had been living in before I got there. And so like I think I bought the bed in the bedroom, but otherwise like I had no furniture. I had kitchen stuff, books, and clothes, and like that was really it. And
Yeah.
so I put everything except for my clothes in storage in New York and just moved home. And I was like, I'm just going to take 6 months to kind of figure out what's going on and what I'm doing. That was kind of like the deadline I had given myself. And I started like I did a couple little like freelance projects immediately after I left New York. And then so I left like, October 2015. And it was so strange, but like literally like the second week of December, the phone started ringing, and so many people were hiring and wanting to talk to me, which felt very lovely. But I was like, oh God, am I ready for all of this? But
Yeah.
so I flew to New York literally like, I think on the 21st, and like was there like the 21st through the 23rd, and like did all of these interviews, and with very big companies, some smaller companies, and went home and was kind of just thinking about all of those. And then I came to Chicago for New Year's, where my best friend has been living here. And talking about it, and again, and I loved Chicago when I lived here after college, and so I was like, maybe Chicago would be great again. And I knew the woman I eventually came to work for. I knew her before I worked for her, and so I messaged her to see if she was around for coffee, and so we grabbed coffee and started talking. And again, it was like timing. Everything happens for a reason. Like she was at an interesting stage of growth in the agency she owned. And was like, yeah, I could use someone like you for sure. And so we kept the conversation going, and I kept interviewing in New York. But again, nothing was really feeling right. I really thought like if I went back to New York, I was going to go in-house for a brand. I didn't necessarily want to go back to another agency.
Yeah.
And so, but then again, things just kind of like developed with Chicago. And I remember calling, I can't remember if I called or if I was there in person in New York, but talking to an old boss, and just feeling very conflicted of like, do I leave New York and go to Chicago? And she's like, listen, like, you've done New York, you've proven yourself, like New York's not going anywhere. Like, if you want to come back, like, we're all still here. So like, try Chicago.
Yeah.
And I was like, great. So so I came to Chicago, and that was, so I eventually like, got the offer for Chicago, came here in April 2016, and I've been here ever since.
That's so cool. Do you think that time that you gave yourself after your dad passed allowed you to grieve in a way that if you had stayed in New York, you may not have been able to address it? Or do you feel like because of things never really stopped, or you were doing all these interviews, that you didn't get the downtime?
Honestly, like, I'm not sure I would have given myself the downtime had I lived anywhere.
Right.
Definitely it's one of those things that takes a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it definitely helped. Like, I'm really thankful for that time, to again, just have at home, and to just kind of like hang out and not feel, it was a very scary thought because again, like I spent, 3 years post college trying to find my dream job. And so then to decide to leave it, to take care of myself was a terrifying decision.
Yeah.
But I had to have faith that, again, like I, proven myself. I, now worked at 3 of the best agencies in New York, and, I know what I'm doing. And so, yeah, I'm very thankful I had that time, and I took that time too.
Yeah. Did you always, do you have the idea of ever starting your own company, or was it like what got you to the point where you're like, actually, I'm going to do this on my own now versus like staying with a company or an agency?
No, oh my God. I never thought I would be a business owner. I never, no, like I never, ever thought that this is where I was going to be. And that's, I think, part of why it like took me so long. Again, I mean, I say it took me so long to do it, but again, I go back to like, I think everything happens at the time it's supposed to. And I think it happened exactly kind of when it was supposed to. I'd been at this agency, the agency I came to Chicago for, I'd been at, I guess at this point, like 7.5 years.
Yeah.
And it was great, but I was just ready for a change. Like truly, like out of no other reason than like, I mean, 7.5 years is a long time in one place.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was just kind of feeling like antsy of like, wanting to do something different. But I again, like I wasn't finding, any opportunities that really like piqued my interest, or the opportunities I was going after, I wasn't getting. And then one person, with 2 different clients or 2 different possibilities for clients was like, hey, I have someone that is looking for, PR services. Would you want to take them on like solo and not like part of like your agency or whatnot? And I was like,
Yeah.
And then like it was really this person and then my best friend who were like, you can do this on your own. Like you can totally do it. And yeah, and it took some time to like really think through because like I have no desire to have my own agency. Like that's truly not what I'm, out for. And I really decided that going out on my own was just going to be like the path to whatever is next, which I'm still not, exactly sure, but I just wanted, the flexibility to again, like work with brands in a different way, to do some different things. Again, the industry has changed so much since I started. And I just wanted, when you work at an agency with clients, there are very specific like scopes of work, and you kind of like have your lane that you're in and that you have to focus on. And yeah, so I just kind of wanted to be in a position with a little bit more fluidity of just trying things out and experimenting. And so it's been really nice to be able to have that.
Do you feel like your approach to communications and marketing has changed since you've gone out on your own? Like, are you able to see things through a different lens because you're not necessarily beholden to an agency? Not that that's a bad thing, but because you didn't have the framework that the company itself provided, and you are now like looking at it as an individual.
Yeah, I think, in the agency world, the goal is retain our clients. Like that's kind of always what you want, because that helps, helps you give a little bit of, idea of kind of like what the future looks like, helps so then you can hire and plan and all of that, which I totally get.
Reoccurring revenue is a real thing.
Yes. But what I've been able to embrace is smaller project work. So like I love doing like a 3-month project for a brand and then kind of like leaving and sending them on their way. And because I think one of the things I discovered is 2 things. Like a lot of brands think they need PR, but maybe don't even have a really good understanding of what PR is or like what the story is. And a lot of this is all like manufactured, like, and it's like, it's, and it's not so much like what the brand or what your PR person can do for you, but like your PR person is really there to help you like amplify your story. And so a lot of times for a story to be told about a brand, the brand really has to start doing certain things to put the wheels in motion so that there's something to talk about. So I kind of like, that's a part I really like doing is, being able to sit down with brands and figure out what the story is and almost kind of like roadmap of like, how do you get there? And because, something I say a lot, it might still be on my website. If it isn't, it was there for a while, because I say it all the time. One of the biggest shifts in the industry is a brand no longer has to wait for someone to tell their story because of the way technology has changed kind of the media landscape, just like the world landscape. But, a brand now has so many what we call owned channels. So, your website, your email marketing, your Instagram, your TikTok, like all of that, your YouTube, all of that is an owned channel where you're fully controlling the narrative and where you can put out your story. So you don't have to wait for Vogue to tell it, or you don't have to wait for Harper's Bazaar to tell it. And those are wonderful outlets. And I think their coverage still has a lot of value for brands. But again, it's like, so it's like being able to work with brands to really help them kind of understand that too. It's been really interesting. So that I think is just being able to like have that flexibility to, again, because I have no employees and don't want any employees and don't want payroll or anything like that. Like I'm not looking for, I do have some retainer clients, that I do work on, but for the most part, they're not like, traditional PR clients that need the strength and energy of an agency. So I feel fortunate that I can just kind of do these little projects or really kind of come up with scopes that meet the needs of the client as opposed to kind of forcing them into a specific path.
Have you seen a change? Because I'll just speak from my own experience with PR. Like we paid a lot of money, and when I first started, for very good PR, and they did a great job. And sometimes it's like chicken and the egg. Like you have this great PR, but you don't have the infrastructure or the sales channels or whatever to back it up. And then sometimes it's like, well, you can't get the sales channel unless you have the PR. And the industry has changed a lot. So now exactly what you're speaking about, like brands can have their own voice and they can tell. But I remember very specifically being told like your website needs to sound generic because the editors need to be able to put their own spin, like, at these magazines. And now that these magazines don't have as much sway, I feel, because brands are telling their own story, how do you kind of see that landscape having changed in the past, like I would say like 14, 15 years?
Yeah, no, I don't think you necessarily like have to like, I wouldn't say your website has to be like generic in that sense of like,
No, this
yeah,
is what I was told 15 years ago. Like
yeah,
when the when brands didn't really even have their own e-commerce sites.
yeah. No, it's like, I think there is, a good journalist is always going to craft the story, in their tone and kind of, or the tone of the publication they're writing for. But they do need, substance, and they need, kind of like the building blocks of the story to take into account, like one of the things I've seen and I've always heard is like, especially kind of in the fashion space, in the traditional sense, like, you see these runway shows and a lot of times you'll see editors like post their a designer's, collection notes. And a lot of it is like this like story or narrative around, what their inspiration was,
Yeah.
for the collection and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of designers hate those. And they're like, I just designed. Like I didn't see a painting that inspired me, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But what I like, but it's, and you don't always have to have that per se, but like, again, having some sort of narrative to be able to give to a journalist just helps kind of steer the direction a little bit
Yeah.
of what the story could be. So I think if you go to them with too little, like then they sometimes probably just wouldn't be interested in, or they could take the story in a totally different direction.
Right.
And you want it because you didn't give them any kind of, path to go on.
Yeah. What I think from what I can tell just from my perspective is that because brands have so many more opportunities to have their own voice and tell their own stories. And I think especially a generation younger than I am has like grown up with this technology and kind of like know how to communicate on online platforms in a very effective way, that so much of that storytelling and messaging is coming and should come from the brand first. And then the now traditional journalism, eventually latches onto it. You're not necessarily having to wait for Vogue, like you said, to tell your story. Like you're not waiting necessarily for that break. It feels like, and sometimes like it was always waiting for the exclusivity of like, oh, let's see if this magazine is going to tell the story first. But now it's like the brand can tell the story and promote it. And then, maybe also then amplify that with traditional PR. But like
Exactly.
the story that the brand has first is different. And I think even brand itself, like, I mean, in design school, we were never taught about brand. We were taught about design. And so, I had no idea about I think I instinctually did have an idea about it because I think I was always interested in more than just being a fashion designer. But I think you're not taught that at all. Like you're just taught about making clothes. And that's very hard for a lot of creative people.
Totally. It's funny. That's why I always said that was a difference I noticed between, even though I didn't do the design program at Parsons, but that was something I noticed. I always thought was a differentiator between FIDM and Parsons in particular, because like, I think FIDM being in LA, like is such a brand city that I feel like, again, that like commerciability of like a brand was so much part of like our training. And then like Parsons, from what I saw, felt a little bit more, like runway couture and
It was
less
conceptual.
Yeah, it was very like conceptual. Yeah. Interesting that you thought that too.
Yeah. No, it was and I think especially in Paris, because I felt, and one of the things I loved about Paris was that it's very much about the craft. And it's like how you make the things and who makes them and how they're made and the care and attention to which are all things I very much value and have tried to bake into what I do now. But that's not necessarily a brand. It's not it's a story you can tell, but it's not necessarily, the starting from the idea of like, how do you build a brand? And it's in many ways like what like these huge luxury conglomerates have done, for better or for worse, in terms of like turning Dior from a couture house into like this big mega brand that's not only doing couture runway shows, but now is doing like spa retreats, that are Dior branded and like this, whole experiential kind of thing. I think our idea of what especially fashion is and brands has evolved a lot. And so rapidly.
Yeah.
So where do you see not only the future of, I guess, the communication and marketing going, but like, what do you see as your role in it? Are you always looking for the next thing, or is it sort of, this is it?
No, I mean, again, like consulting has been really fun. It's been about 2 years, and there's a lot of it that there are a lot of aspects of it that I love, but I love being a part of a team. And I love having coworkers. It's one of the things I miss the most.
Yeah.
So, I do still truly feel like this is just kind of the part of the path or the journey that takes me to whatever is next. And yeah, like I would love to go in-house. I'd love to work at a brand. I think, again, I've done the agency thing all of my career. So going in-house, I think would be a really interesting opportunity, again, just to kind of see, different sides of the business that you're not exposed to when you're on the agency side.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like in my head, but I have no timeline. I'm just kind of, it works for now. And again, like the industry changes so much. So in a year from now, like who knows what I might be looking for or not looking for. Or
Yeah.
kind of, I'm again very open to different conversations always. Like I always take interviews, like even if I'm not looking, because I just think it's an
Yeah.
opportunity to meet someone. So, if a call comes, I'm happy to take it, but I feel very fortunate that I can do what I do now in this consulting space and not feel like I have to rush to like that next like corporate gig, because I know like I had that, I feel like I've had that mentality so much of my life and career, but so we'll see.
Yeah. Do you feel like you have more, I mean, it's such an overused phrase, but work-life balance?
No.
Or,
Well, yes and no. I was going to say no, because I don't know if it's a balance, but it's control. Like there are certain things that, being in PR, a lot of what I do is, communicating with editors and whatnot. So like there's certain hours of the day that like that makes the most sense to, get that work done. But then there's, a lot of times where it's like, I just need to like buckle down and like do some writing or whatnot. That doesn't really have to happen at any specific time. So if I, want to, go meet friends at like 3 o'clock and then sit back down at my computer at 7, like I, love having that control over, what I do. Or if I want to take a nap in the afternoon and then, get back up and get back to work, it's like having that, is nice, which again, like sometimes brings balance, but sometimes it doesn't.
yeah.
And I mean, I guess it's like, the one thing I haven't really figured out, which I don't know if you do, is like, again, like when I go on vacation, like I kind of work the whole time.
Yeah. It's hard.
That's me. It's what I have no employees and whatnot. So I do look forward to someday taking, a vacation again where I can like just turn off my phone and not check email. But
Right.
that's, again, it's all a part of this journey and figuring it out.
Well, I mean, what I'm hearing you say is that you have more flexibility, I guess, with your schedule, but the workload doesn't necessarily change. It just changes when you do it.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of.
Which
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have this misconception, I think, of when you own your own business. Oh, I'm working for myself and nobody else, and I'm not working for the man or whatever they want to call it. But it's actually so much more. And it occupies your brain way more hours than like you may be working long hours at a PR firm, like 16-hour days, especially like during show season. But for the most part, you don't have to take that work home. Like it's hard work when you're there, but then like when you're off, like you're usually relatively off. When you're a business owner, it's always like, well, where's the next paycheck coming from? Who's the next client? So even if you're working on the next thing, and that never ends. Or cash flow issues, or like all these things if a client doesn't pay on time. Like, whether or not you've scheduled the time off doesn't mean you're not thinking about all of those. Yeah. So I am so thankful that you took all this time to talk with me today. And I hope it gives people, especially younger people who are, and it doesn't have to be younger people. It could be people who are looking for a midlife, transition to something new. It doesn't have to be immediate. You know, I think you're a good example of like taking your time and kind of listening for signs and being open to possibility, how much it's shaped who you are. And you don't have to feel stressed that you didn't get the perfect job the moment you graduated or before you graduated. And especially for creative careers, we don't have that prescribed path that doctors and lawyers have, where you have the residency and it just doesn't work that way. Like, so much of it is building and designing the life that you want and being open to it. So I'm really...
well, I'm going to cut you off just to say that, like, I speak very zen about it all now, but I felt not about it all then. So
no, of course not.
To be stressed and crazed about it all. So I'm fortunate that I can look back on it and have, you know, kind of this outlook. But yeah, and I wish, and I'm sure people told it to me in the time, and I wish I would have listened, but I truly believe that everything comes to us what is meant to. So
yes, I think timing is everything, and being patient, and also understanding that just because something fails or doesn't work out, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. It just means that that's not what was meant for you now. And there's another opportunity coming your way that you may not have seen if you were still in the current situation, like your whole roommate situation. Like, you know, you were scared of making that leap, even though you felt that gut like pull to change. But sometimes like life hands you those opportunities and you have to be willing to kind of accept them. And that can be very scary.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It could be terrifying because you're like, what am I doing? Like leaving this the life I always thought I wanted to live. And it's okay to change that idea because your perspective has changed. I don't think it changes who you are as a person. It just changes your perspective. So I look forward to seeing what you continue to do, because I love keeping up with your Instagram and like seeing what you're doing and all the fun things and the people that you get to talk to. And it's really fun. So check out Travis's Instagram. And if you want to work with somebody like Travis, like you should work with Travis because he's awesome. And all of his information and website will be in the show notes. So thanks so much.
Thanks, David.
And there you have it. Another episode of Inside the Design Studio in the books. If you enjoyed this exploration of life's design, hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And hey, if you're feeling extra generous, leave us a review. Your thoughts fuel our creative journey. I'm David Peck, your design companion on this adventure. Until next time, keep crafting a life that's as captivating as your favorite masterpiece.